what they're presenting to Canadians right now, I think is a conscious choice not to say there's going to be major change. Do you think that's the right decision strategically?
I don't.
It was officially back to school for many children across the country today, which means the summer political barbecue circuit has ended. What does that mean for the major political parties as the last fall session of the Trudeau government heats up? Well, we bring you our perspectives as well as the talking heads.
Let's take a look.
He will not quit. He must be fired. And the person to do it is Jagmeet Singh. Break the costly coalition with Trudeau to trigger a carbon tax election.
You're not going to see Justin Trudeau or Pierre Poilievre on a picket line, but you'll always see me and Alexandra and New Democrats in solidarity with you. We were founded by workers and unions. We will always stand in solidarity with you.
I'm fairly confident that that agreement is a good agreement, it's a strong agreement, and we'll get to the end of June.
We're still a year plus away from the election. I'm focused on making sure we're delivering through that election the kinds of things that Canadians need.
That's the Prime Minister's line. He's got a year before facing the national electorate, but as we speak, his party is fighting for 2 House of Commons seats in by-elections set for just 2 weeks from today, one in Winnipeg and one in Montreal. The Liberals kicked off the summer with a major surprise by-election loss in Toronto. So did the summer set the stage for any recovery, or is the Prime Minister up for more ballot blues? Let's bring in the front bench with me tonight. Former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's the CEO of Space Canada. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is here, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody. Hope you had a great summer. Very happy to see you all.
Hey, guys.
Brian, I'll start with you because the last time we convened was, I believe, like the day after that by-election loss. Is the strategy the Liberals employed over the summer what you would have expected on the heels of that?
Well, not with the context of the heels of the by-election, because one would say after that there would have had to been some big change to try to demonstrate to caucus, to Liberals across the country, and more importantly to Canadians that they got the message and they're going to be doing something drastic to make some big change to get the course where it needs to be going. That said, I do think that they're listening to advice that somebody's given them that I started, I'd like to think, about a year ago, where we were talking about all the sort of moving pieces for the Liberals, and the advice I gave was just govern, just focus on governing. I mean, the best way in which they can prepare for the re-election attempt is just to try to address the major challenges, and it sounds like coming out of the cabinet that's their focus. The challenge now, to the way that you frame the question, is there's a lot of water under the bridge. I still think governing and doing a good job of addressing the costs that people are feeling over the last little while, and trying to make sure that they're focused on the things that people care about will be the best thing they can do. But with the politics of by-elections that they should have won on paper not going their way, internally and with some Liberal organizers, I think that there's still going to be a need for some change to be signaled by the Liberals.
So I don't agree with this guy. It's weird. He was almost talking out of both sides of his mouth, because the question is did they do, what they should have done? And he says, well, no. But then he turns around and says, but they started to do what I said that they should do, a year ago. So they're either doing what they should have done or not. But this is the thing. Vassy, Mulcair, and a bunch of these ex-political people, all of them, and I mean all of them, thought that there was going to be at least one major change this summer, and that was Chrystia Freeland.
I think we thought that as well.
We 100% thought that.
You saw the pattern with the previous finance minister and now with Freeland. It really is shocking to us that she still has her job as finance minister.
Which is great because it gives us like hours and hours of more content because like just keep putting her out there, you know.
Well, and it's good for the Conservative Party as well because they can point to the Liberal Party and say, see, the Prime Minister is going to be the same guy. The Finance Minister is going to be the same person. These are your two major players in how this country is governed and how you pay your taxes and how your tax money is spent. So why would you vote for that again?
Right. And it's just bizarre. And Trudeau comes out and says, well, we're just going to be doing more of the same.
More of the same is how we got into this mess in the first place.
Right. And more of the same is how you ended up 20 points down in the polls. So this has now become the definition of insanity because you could actually just, you know, swap this fall for last fall, and they came out of their cabinet retreat. Yes, they came out with a new cabinet, but saying the same thing. Oh, well, we need to tackle housing.
Yeah, and so they put the guy who broke immigration in charge of housing.
Right, but they're saying the same thing this year. Well, we need to tackle housing. Hello?
You guys had a year, and what's gotten done? Nothing.
Right, the same as the last 8 years before that. But now it's a priority because you're getting, you know, an ass kicking in the polls.
Well, and that's right, because Trudeau had said it's not a primary federal responsibility. And as soon as he faced the backlash for that from voters, all of a sudden it became a top priority.
Interesting, though, Lisa, as Brian lays out, is the calls even within caucus came very shortly after that by-election loss for more substantive change. Like the people, the Prime Minister himself and the people around him made a conscious decision not to pursue that kind of agenda through the summer or even at their cabinet retreat just last week, right? Like what they're presenting to Canadians right now, I think is a conscious choice not to say there's going to be major change. Do you think that's the right decision strategically?
I don't. And I'll tell you why, because he's not listening to people. He's not listening to his own caucus. He may not be listening to cabinet ministers who may have points of view. But even that last clip, Vassy, that you had of the Prime Minister, what he said is that he is going to make sure he's delivering on what people need. Well, he's decided what people need. On the other hand, Pierre Poilievre's going across the country, crisscrossing, and asking people what it is they want. And what people are saying that they want is they want safety and they want affordability in their lives. And he's promising that, whereas the Prime Minister is saying, well, I know what you need. I've got this. I'm going to tell you what you guys need. And that is the wrong way to approach Canadians right now because they are hurting. So, no, I think he has to listen. He has to be shown to be listening to people other than the folks that are around him or himself.
I think Ms. Raitt was right on the money right there. Canadians are screaming, you know, the taxes we pay are too high. The programs that you're allegedly giving to us are broken and we can't access them. You know, inflation is insane. We're paying too much at the grocery store. We're paying too much for rent and mortgages. And these are our problems. And the Prime Minister is just like, no, trust me, it'll be fine.
Well, I think it's even worse than that. I don't even think he's acknowledging it. He's just saying, well, we're going to continue to deliver for Canadians. And they're like, who am I talking to?
Been delivering. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I mean, you've been a leader in your workplace. And when your employees come to you and say, there's a problem, this is what we need to fix it. Your first response isn't, oh, it'll be fine. Just deal with it. It's fine.
Yeah, it'll be fine. Don't worry.
Yeah, I know what's good for you guys. You know, you trust the people on the ground. You trust the people who are experiencing this. And I think Trudeau's forgotten that. He's high up in this ivory tower and he's telling Canadians how good we've all got it, not realizing or maybe not caring how bad things actually are.
Well, and the primary example, if you need one, is when he was in Sault Ste. Marie, Algoma Steel, and he was talking to that steel worker. Or let me rephrase, he was talking at that steel worker.
What about the 40% taxes I'm paying, and I don't have a doctor?
The $400 million in invest in the card means you're going to have a job for
I think you're only here for another year. We won't see you around probably another year.
No, that's what elections are for.
That's right.
And I look forward to everyone exercising the right to vote.
Yep.
And the basic choice, we're going to invest in you and your jobs.
I don't believe you for a second.
Yeah, because talking to somebody implies that there's an exchange and that you're listening as well as talking.
Right. So this guy is basically saying, I'm paying 40% more tax. And all Trudeau is doing is saying, well, we've done this and we've done this and we've done this. And it's like, this has turned into essentially another version of we have a AAA credit rating. Canadians are like, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. What matters is what is not in my bank account that used to be there, which is money.
Well, and it's even worse than that. I saw this morning that had kind of turned into a witch hunt on that poor gentleman.
Yes.
Where there was an article written, and you'll have to forgive me, I don't recall which online journal was in, but where the author was basically criticizing the steelworkers, saying, well, if you pay 40% income tax, then, you must be in this income tax bracket and blah, 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 blah. It's not what the guy said at all. He said that he pays 40% taxes. And if you listen to the report from the Fraser Institute, Canadians pay 43% of their income on taxes. Now that's income tax, that's a homeowner's tax, that's gas tax, carbon tax, HST, PST, GST, whatever it is across the province. The tax-free day this year, which was the Fraser Institute considers it the day that Canadians, it's the first day in the year that Canadians can actually start paying or can actually start spending their own money because all of their taxes are paid. So basically it's 43% of the way through the year. It was, I believe, if I'm not misremembering, it was June the 13th this year. So 43% of the days in the year had gone by before Canadians can start spending their own money. The rest of it, up until that point, had gone to taxes. And it was 4 days later than it was the previous year in 2023. That's insane. You work almost half of the year just to give it to the government.
Well, and you don't even have to take our word or the Fraser Institute's word for it. The Canadian Taxpayer Federation, in our interview with Franco Terrazzano, he completely agreed with that number. Over 40% of all of the money that you're paying out there is to taxes. And this is the thing. This is what people aren't listening. And it wasn't even just that this gentleman was getting railroaded for. He was also accused of being a conservative plant. He was also accused of being, the head of this, activist, mobile political movement. And all of it is false. Tom Mulcair, of all people, the other day actually talked about this, and he said, no, this guy was in a secure location in Algoma. There's no way you're getting a conservative plant in there.
Well, and that's the thing that I think makes me most upset about the left. And it's not just the government doing it, it's all their supporters as well. They don't seem to understand that Canadians can make up their minds and have a completely different opinion than they do. That just because somebody has an opposing viewpoint does not mean they're a plant, does not mean they're working for the Conservative Party. Canadians of all walks of life can make up their own minds and decide which political party they want to support.
I think, Tom, if you were to talk to Liberals right now, though, they would argue that sort of the reduced public nature of the Prime Minister's summer, like he was not as public as he has been in other summers, is a reference to what Lisa is talking about, that they spent their time listening, moving from different parts of the country to the next, trying to figure out what they could do to better address Canadians' needs. What I find interesting is at the conclusion of that, they decided what they're doing is the right thing and not to put anything substantively different in the window.
No, it was Groundhog Day. I mean, from Charlottetown last summer to Halifax this summer is let's talk about this housing crisis we've just discovered. Yeah, but you've been there for 8-9 years in those two cases. One of the other things that I noticed is that Mr. Trudeau's team was not putting out his agenda. I mean, that's a classic thing. You give the agenda that people know is going to be there so that journalists can come and ask questions. And journalists were not allowed to ask questions. There was one pool journalist who would go in and not be given much access. So there was very little news coming out of the summer. Maybe that's a strategy in and of itself. I'm not sure it's a winning strategy at this stage. I think that Trudeau's got to show that he's got some understanding of where the public wants to go right now. The answer that he's been giving for a year and a half since his numbers really started to fall in the polls is, I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing.
Well, I'm glad to hear the mainstream media actually talking about the fact that Trudeau's agenda was not available to reporters this summer. Or, as we had discussed in a previous video, they would say that he wasn't doing anything that day. And then later, after the event had already happened, they would update his itinerary and say, oh, he was in, Winnipeg this morning doing such and such.
Yeah, and Vassy actually said it probably as nicely as you could say, in that he wasn't really, doing public, interviews and wasn't doing public appearances. And this is the problem. You work literally for the public. So for him to go into hiding, just like, I could say some words that are unparliamentary, but it's literally your job to be accountable to the public. So for you to just do that, it is actually disgraceful. And it shows the character of this guy that we all know, but it's something else to actually see it in action when he tries to avoid any press conferences whatsoever. He was running from the questions from the Toronto by-election. He was running from the questions about Chrystia Freeland and all of those things that were circulating in the media. And he was running from the fact that Poilievre was again out there having rallies in NDP and Liberal ridings, getting thousands of people and kicking his ass.
And there's a basic rule that when what you're doing doesn't work, try something else. And right now they seem to be very, very low on ideas of what that something else could be. There are great, strong members of that cabinet. A lot of them, can be doing very important things. But what we wind up with in the papers is, you were just talking about the situation with supplying weapon systems to Ukraine. Months and months waiting for Canada to even put the money on the table. We know that there are other aspects to that. But that's the type of news that gets out there when you're not providing any news on your own.
Why do you think that they have decided that that's a strategy, though, Rob, that they're going to employ, right? Like, they're not immune to the polling that we're talking about. They do their own private polling. Somehow they decided over the last 2 months the best thing to do was to stay the track, govern as Brian laid out, and, in anticipation of, I think, the circumstances, the context changing, the economy getting better, people's personal plight getting better over the next year. Why do you think they arrived at that conclusion? Yeah.
Why? And this is where, again, don't agree with Tom a lot of the time. And this is one of those occasions. There's a lot of strong people in that cabinet, not from what I've seen.
I think Trudeau has stacked himself with a weak cabinet so that he has no obvious successor. Another thing, the Liberals are celebrating the fact that the interest rates are going down and that inflation is slowing. And, I think there may be some Canadians that fall for this and say, oh, okay, the Liberals are doing a good job. I, however, believe, on the other hand, that the Liberals keep claiming, oh, we had no control over it going up, but we do have control over it going down. What's to say it's not going to go back up again and you guys have no control over it?
Well, then it'll be somebody else's fault again.
I think Vassy was the only choice that they felt they had. I'm not sure I agree with it, but it's not my call to make. I think if I were them, I would be looking south of the border and seeing what the Democrats did to revitalize their party and their chances of winning an election. They changed leaders. And that's why Kamala Harris is in a lot better position than Joe Biden would have been against Donald Trump. And I think that Mr. Trudeau, we saw the last time the five of us were together, Vassy, was the morning after that by-election shocker here in Toronto, St. Paul's. That was the beginning of the summer. You'd think it was the beginning of a time of reflection for the Liberals. I actually thought it would be for the Prime Minister. I'm surprised he's still the leader of that party. But maybe a by-election loss in Montreal in 2 weeks will sober them up even more. Because I don't think that this is unwinnable for the Liberals in the future. I'm just not sure that it is, because Pierre Poilievre has made the same mistake I think that Donald Trump made, and made everything a referendum on the leader. It's always just inflation. Trudeau did this, Trudeau that. And just as Trump is blaming everything on Biden. And I think the problem with that is if they change leaders, and if the Liberals change leaders, all of a sudden that huge pillar of Mr. Poilievre's strategy is gone. And I think a lot of the anger toward the governing Liberal Party will be gone too. I'm not saying that they're suddenly going to close that 13 to 20% percentage point gap, but I think that it would be lower than it is now if they change leaders.
So here's what I think. I think very early on, like back in probably 2013, when Justin Trudeau became leader of the Liberal Party, and this was before he was elected Prime Minister, I think that the Liberal Party made the mistake of like combining their brand, the Liberal brand, with Justin Trudeau so that they're one and the same. You cannot separate the two. So even if they get rid of Trudeau, the Liberal brand is still tainted and it's still going to have difficulty. Will you have some people come around and vote for the Liberals if Trudeau is no longer the leader? Sure. But I think in the mind of Canadians, that Liberal brand has been so poisoned that really there's no rescuing it, not for a very long time.
Well, and you, like, I've been through rebrands. That doesn't happen overnight.
No.
Look at what Trudeau went through when he was essentially called in to try and rescue the Liberal Party. It didn't change overnight. It took a while. So for somebody new to come in and just say, you know, I'm the new leader of the Liberal Party and everything's going to be great now. And then it's not really that surprising. This gentleman works for the Toronto Star, which is pretty Liberal friendly. But for him to say that, you know, everyone's just going to, you know, forget about what's happened over the last 8 years and, you know, they're all of a sudden going to stop caring that they have no money in their bank account, stop caring that they're living in a tent, stop caring that their kids can't buy a home, and stop caring that their grocery bill is 5 times of the cost of what it was before. They're just going to stop caring about that? I don't think so. I think what Canadians are going to remember, similar to Tanya's point, but taking it in a bit of a different direction, is that they're going to look at all the rest of those Liberals that are in cabinet and say, this is also your fault. You've allowed this guy to be there. Doesn't matter if you don't have it in your constitution to eject your leader. There's ways to do it. But all of you have allowed that to happen.
Well, and all of them have supported Justin Trudeau and his ideas by voting for them in the House, even the backbenchers.
Yep.
None of them have been brave enough to stick up and say, enough is enough. I'm voting against you. I don't care what punishment I receive from the whip for not following the orders, but I can't stand for this. My constituents won't stand for this, and neither will I.
But as it relates to the NDP, it's going to be interesting. Really interesting to see what happens on Monday. We would live stream it if the longest ballot committee wasn't going to be in town, because literally, you know, the polls are going to open and that's going to be counting until like 4 a.m. again, just like St. Paul, so that we're not going to do that. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because in the other ridings, in the other by-elections, Durham and St. Paul, they were way overrepresented in the polls. The question is are they going to be way overrepresented in the polls in the Quebec riding, where they have the chance to take that seat away from Trudeau, or are the Liberals going to be overrepresented in the polls? So that's going to be a really fascinating one to see. The one in Manitoba, that's going to Blakey and the NDP. Like, that's...
Well, Blakey's not there anymore, which is why the seat's vacant. But yeah, it's most likely going to the NDP because they have held it for the better part of 30 years, if I'm not mistaken. But the Conservatives are giving them a run for their money. I mean, we thought for sure the Liberals would win Toronto St. Paul's, and they didn't. So time will tell.
There is literally nobody who wants Justin Trudeau to remain as leader more than the people who surround Pierre Poilievre and Poilievre himself. That is another thing I learned over the summer, Brian. I wanted to get your take on what Rob flagged, and that is what the Montreal by-election in particular means, given this was Paul Martin's seat, former Liberal Justice Minister David Lametti as well, considered a very safe Liberal seat in a similar way as the Toronto St. Paul's one was. I think after that one, everyone thought, oh my gosh, this is an earthquake. As Paul Wells says, everyone except the Prime Minister. Does Montreal play out the same way if, in fact, they are to lose?
I mean, who knows, right? Yeah. I mean, we a week before the Toronto by-election, we all said, I mean, that would be pretty bad, right? That would be pretty bad. And it ended up being, yes, a bit of a storm for the Prime Minister, but then the summer came and things kind of calmed down. Now, is everybody happy? I'm sure they're not, but the discontent, at least from the public-facing version of it, is really dissipated. So I think that, yes, it would be a big deal, and it would be yet another sort of big, huge push for people to ask themselves within the Liberal Party and Liberal government what they need to do to start to resonate. But I'm not sure anymore that would be enough to really propel them to do something huge. Now, the one thing I do want to just add, coming out of the cabinet retreat, which you would be better placed than I to comment on, but I do think they were talking about some bold action. So that is maybe the one thing that they said that will kind of change up. We'll come out with some big policies. I don't know what that could be from an electoral point of view that would be able to help them sort of spin things around and demonstrate that change, but maybe they have something in mind.
The only indicator we got was really around the possibility of massive change to immigration policy. They're looking at reducing permanent numbers, but still everything's like kind of looking ahead into the fall. No specific announcement other than on the temporary side. Lisa, last word to you on this topic. How important do you think that by-election is?
So before we get into that, this was also something really interesting that the Liberals have been discussing. So they've talked a lot about cutting back on the temporary foreign workers. And they've been asked multiple times, are you going to be cutting back the number of permanent immigration
permanent residents?
Yeah, that you're bringing in every year. And nobody would say anything. So I find this very interesting because this flies in the way of their 2021 campaign plan as drafted and massaged and perfected by the Century Initiative.
Well, and Mark Miller a little while back had made the mistake, I suppose you could say, of saying that, oh, well, you know, with temporary workers, we'll just convert them to permanent residents and then we'll have fewer of them. Like, just such a flippant remark.
Yeah, but he was serious, and that's the funny thing. Well, it's not really funny because the impact of it.
Yeah, it's like, how could you say something like that and just not realize what you just said?
Well, and this goes back to, you know, Tom Mulcair saying, oh, there's a bunch of strong people in the cabinet. I don't know about that, Tom.
I think the by-election that just passed was very important because it woke people up. And I think that the by-elections to come are going to be equally important. I'm very interested in what my friend Tom Mulcair has to say about the announcement that some Liberal staffers are not going to be supporting the Liberal Party in Montreal and are vocal about it. And that's just showing that there is a lot of tension within the party for a whole bunch of different reasons. And it's going to be difficult, I think, to see those two by-elections come and go. I would add one other thing. I do think that Pierre Poilievre understands very clearly the fact that without Trudeau in the seat, it's a different kind of electoral prospect for him. And that's why they're pivoting hard on their new media. And their media doesn't talk about Justin Trudeau anymore. It's going straight to the workers in the warehouses, to the servers, to the farmers and soldiers, et cetera, and talking to them directly, and doesn't mention Trudeau once. So maybe they took your advice, Vassy.
I would never offer advice to any political party. I'm going to go a bit long because Lisa's right. Tom, I do want to get your view on Montreal, if you can, in 30 seconds. What do you think is going to happen there?
It should be a slam dunk for the Liberals because the three parts of that riding, LaSalle is so Liberal, it should be easy. But Lisa's right. A lot of the Liberal staffers, on ideological reasons, have said they're not going to come in. Actually, your staffers are not really supposed to be there. It should be volunteers, but they have very few volunteers left. So if they're not able to get out their vote in LaSalle, they could be in trouble. The Bloc's not really in play here. The Conservatives are not really in play here. The NDP has a very attractive candidate, well known in the area, city councillor, well liked. He's from the Verdun side. He should have that in a lock. Anything can happen, but I don't see how the Liberals could possibly lose unless their vote stays home, in which case we're right back to the Toronto-St. Paul scenario and a lot of soul searching for the Liberals.
So not sure how many people have actually heard about this, but in the Montreal by-election riding, where all this drama is going to unfold, most of the Liberal volunteers have actually said, we're done. We don't agree with any of what you're doing. We're out.
Yeah, it was specifically regarding the Liberals' policy around the Gaza Strip. And they have just said, you know what? We're done. We're not helping. Figure it out on your own. And volunteers are an extremely important part of any political campaign, including by-elections. So,
well, and we've talked to some of the MPs and the Conservatives. The volunteers are literally what won the Toronto St. Paul by-election.
Right, because you've got boots on the ground, people knocking on doors, asking who are you going to be voting for, and then talking to people in their homes, talking to people, like we went to a festival and we were talking to people about the Conservative Party and their platform, just making people aware of what the party stands for, because not everybody is as into politics as we are, right? So keep having those conversations and keep informing Canadians who may not know exactly what's going on.